Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order for Thursday, July 22nd. Roll call, please.
Member Cap,
Present.
Member Planera,
Here.
Member O'Brien,
Here.
Member Johnson,
Here.
Member Bransky, and Member Alfonso.
Here. Okay, we have normally approval of our minutes, but they're not done yet, so we're going to postpone those to our next meeting in August. Also, we are going to defer case number 21-19, a variance from section 8.2 for required setback in a required backyard. We're going to postpone that until August 12th also. We have one case before us tonight. And we will have time for audience participation when that time comes. We'll have 3 minutes to speak. We're going to ask you to state your name, and if you want to give us where you live, that's fine, but we at least need your name, please. And if everybody could please silence their phone at this point. Okay, the goal of the meeting is to collect comments from commission members and the public on preliminary policies that will be used to guide updates to the zoning code. The majority of the code has not been revised since 2002. When the current code was enacted, much has changed in the last 19 years, land use, in the economy, and in the law. The village has contracted with Halcyon Levine Associates, who is here tonight to present initial policy direction and preliminary responses for both the survey and the interactive map. This is the first of 4 public meetings to specifically discuss updates to the zoning code. The next meeting is scheduled for January 27th, 2022 at 7 p.m. in the Village Hall. Dates and times of future meetings will be shared once they are finalized. The survey and interactive map will remain open throughout this 18-month process. We ask that all speakers called to the podium first identify themselves. And again, like I said, if you wish to identify where you live, the village or street, that's entirely up to you. Commentary is going to be limited to 3 minutes per person. Should any speaker wish to offer further comments beyond the time allowed, they can submit comments by email or placing them in the drop box outside the Village Hall. There will be a time limit of 3 minutes, and we're going to have a time limit for the meeting of 9:30 tonight. Again, this is a workshop for the Planning and Zoning Commission board members. So we have Jackie, I believe, who's going to start out.
Thank you so much. Just go ahead and get this PowerPoint going here. All right, so thank you all so much for having us here this evening. We're really excited to be kicking off the zoning code update project with this initial policy direction memo. So since the village hasn't updated its comprehensive plan in quite a while, we want to ensure that all of the policy that's in the current comprehensive plan and the downtown plan is still relevant for the village, and then to discuss some new policy direction that might impact the zoning code as we update it. So for today's meeting, we're going to go through some brief introductions of me and my colleague here, Ruben. Then we'll discuss the update purpose and goals. So why are we doing this whole project? Review the project scope and schedule, discuss some of the outreach that we've heard so far through our online methods, then go through the initial policy direction memo. So I'll give an overview of the issue that we've recognized, the current regulation, what the existing policy is here in the village, and then what our proposed policy would be moving forward. Then we'll have a discussion with you all to better understand if our proposed policy is moving in the right direction. And then you all can open it up for public comment. We'll also ask that if there are any other policy topics that you all think are relevant to include or to consider as a part of the zoning code update, we'd ask after we go through our initial policy direction findings, you all can bring those up then. And then we'll discuss next steps. So first, introductions. I am Jackie Wells, project manager with House of Levine Associates. I'm joined by Ruben, who'll be the lead support for the project. House of Levine is a consulting firm, an urban planning consulting firm out of Chicago. We focus on planning, zoning, and economic development. We are very excited to be working here in Homewood. We love working in the Chicagoland region and have worked on, I would say, more than 20 zoning codes in this area. So the purpose and goals of the zoning code update. So just like Chair Zerzaga said earlier, the code has not been updated since 2002, so it's been almost 2 decades, and a lot has changed since that has happened. So there are a lot of modern standards, modern trends that are not included in the code, and we'll discuss a lot of those this evening. We definitely want to make the code more user-friendly, ensure that there are graphics and tables and other representations so everyone that uses the code is able to understand it. You don't have to go to Angela to get an interpretation. You don't have to go to the village attorney to get an understanding of the code, that everyone's able to utilize it moving forward. We also want to identify and remove any inconsistencies. There are always circumstances where we update the code, we adopt an amendment, and then accidentally that conflicts with something else that's in the code. That can happen when we don't do these comprehensive amendments, when we do patchwork amendments over time. We also want to ensure compliance with federal, state, and local legislation. A lot has changed on the federal side and the state side. In terms of the compliance that the village needs to come into to ensure that we are in full compliance with all of those standards.
Jackie, excuse me, does that microphone work?
I'm not sure.
It's on, yeah, it's.
I have a friend who's trying to watch via Zoom and doesn't have the passcode to the meeting.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, the passcode is. 573-812.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have to sign the agreement to make that today? No. Maybe we have to sign
Nope.
it.
No.
So for the project scope, we have a 4-step process. Starting off with project initiation and upfront community outreach. This is the step we are in currently. So we really are in the preliminary stages of the project. We haven't proposed any changes. We haven't really discussed how we want to rethink or reimagine the code moving forward. This is just very preliminary stages of the process. So after we collect all of the input from the folks here, as well as you all, we'll move into step 2, which is the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations, where we'll summarize all of that outreach, as well as do a deep dive into your existing code and identify the issues and concerns that we have from our expertise and perspective. And then we will include all of that in a memo and that will then be presented again to the public. Then step 3, we have our draft zoning code sections and review meetings. So we take all of the feedback that we got on the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations framework and include that in the draft zoning code update. So we will update the code in sections so that the review can be done iteratively. And then once all of that is finalized, we go through step 4, which is the draft and final zoning code, where we go through final legal review and then get the code adopted. So this is about an 18-month process. So we're looking at November 2022 for that adoption time. So there's plenty of time in between to provide all the feedback that we need. So it's really important that you all are here. We're very excited to have you here. Input on this process is essential to ensuring that the zoning code is what the village needs it to be for years to come. So if past trends tell, it'll be another 20 years until the code's updated again. So this is a really important project to ensure that the village is developing the way that it wants to for the next couple decades. So this is just our project schedule, just shows the various steps of the project and then how those are going to be completed over our 18-month time period. All right, so getting into our outreach to date, very exciting stuff. So we have a lot of methods to provide for the public to provide their input. On the village's website, there is a link on the front page here, and when you click the Learn More, it'll take you to a page that has a link to an online questionnaire, which we have a printed version of on the back table. You could also create a map in map.social, which is a cooperative mapping tool where everyone can create their own map and drop pins and say what they think the greatest asset in the community is, where additional buffering and screening might be necessary. You could add your comments, include pictures. Your neighbors can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they agree or disagree. And it's a really great way of providing a lot of location-specific feedback about the community. Like I said, we have the printed questionnaires here on the back table, and they'll be available at Village Hall. So you all can fill those out and drop them off, probably in the Dropbox or here in the office. You're always welcome to drop off written comments at the Village Hall Dropbox or email those comments to pzc@homewoodil.gov. So far, this is maybe an hour before the meeting, we had about 154 total responses, which is really awesome. I've had zoning update projects before where there have been maybe 5 people total that have provided feedback. So we really appreciate all of the feedback, all of the engagement. It's really a good sign that we've gotten so many responses so far. So for our preliminary results, this is just so far, around 50% of respondents think the code should address issues of noise, lighting, traffic, commercial vehicle parking, and other nuisances for single-family detached homes. More than 50% of respondents said that the uses listed there should have enhanced standards related to their exterior appearance. And then for those types of uses, so new businesses, apartments, or condominiums, they thought more than 50% thought they should have improved landscaping, exterior building materials, sidewalk and pedestrian spaces, and bicycle infrastructure. More than 50% also thought that the village should require permeable surfaces, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, rain gardens, bioswales, and other landscape options that help manage on-site stormwater, and then tree preservation. There's a really high percentage of respondents that thought tree preservation was important. And then more than 50% of respondents thought the village should encourage, not require, green roofs and green building certification. So this is a screenshot of the map.social page. So as you can see, there's almost 100 individual points that have been added to the map. So the one that we have highlighted here was about, landscaping blocking views and intersections. So that's a great thing to address in the zoning code, including those vision clearance areas, so we can be sure that there's no pedestrian safety issues with those types of uses.
We're not taking questions right now.
I was just asking, can you tell us what the key is for those?
Sure, we could bring that up. Navigate to that, we can show it at the end of the meeting. All right. So now I want to jump into the initial policy direction overview. So this is a overview of the memo that we have copies of outside. So the purpose of the memo, like the chair said, is to identify policies that the village may wish to consider for the zoning code update. And that's also to determine if the policy direction that the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan establish are still applicable for the village. And then also to consider new approaches to address some of the issues that have been identified. So our first topic is about event spaces and multi-use facilities. So there have been several event spaces and multi-use facilities that have been proposed in the village, and they are not currently well addressed in the code. So the code currently regulates them as learning centers, which doesn't adequately really cover what an event space or a multi-use facility would be. So I think there's a rage room that falls under a learning center, and I think you go in and you smash things. So I don't know if that would really, when we think about learning centers, fall into that definition. But that's how the code allows them currently, and they are permitted in the B1 district and then special uses in the other business districts. And the B1 district is your downtown district. In terms of your existing policy, of course, your comprehensive plan and your downtown plan don't specifically address how the village should handle event spaces and multi-use facilities, but does recommend that the downtown be a cluster of clubs, theaters, small entertainment uses, as well as commercial and mixed-use development. So our proposed policy would be to establish new uses that would differentiate between types of event spaces and multi-use facilities, as well as create some use-specific standards that would help manage any off-site impacts and would ensure that they are aligned with the districts they're located in. So that you might have different standards for your downtown area than you would for your other business districts. So I'd like to turn it over for you all to have some discussion and give some direction.
So you want questions from the board right now?
That would be great.
Okay,
Or just thoughts, they don't have to be questions.
okay. Member Johnson, would you like to start?
On this topic, I'll pass.
Okay.
I've just got a simple one. There's a lot of terms here that I can assume what they mean. It's almost like Britain and America separated by a common language. What is unique offsite impacts?
So an
I think
offsite,
I know what it is, but go ahead.
sure, an offsite impact might be noise, it might be light. It's anything that isn't contained within their building or within their lot.
Okay, no other questions.
Member Planera?
I have none on this one.
Member Cap?
I'd just like to, it's a comment, not a question. I really like this approach.
Thank you.
So,
And I have nothing at this point.
All right. So we'll consider this proposed policy as getting a thumbs up from the board, from the members. Very good. Oh. Do you all want to open it up for public comment? Go backwards.
I think right now we're just here to listen and learn.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so our next topic is about the subletting of office spaces. So the issue is there are current office spaces where smaller pieces of the office are being sublet to new uses that might not necessarily be allowed in the district. So the current regulation, there's a certificate of occupancy that's required for a change of use, but that certificate is only triggered when a building permit is required. So if nothing is changing about the building itself, or there's no renovations being done to the office space, I wouldn't trigger the certification requirement if it's just a new use moving into an existing space. So again, there isn't very direct recommendations or policies in the comprehensive plan or the downtown plan that would relate to the subletting of office spaces, but the comprehensive plan does recommend that retail and industrial development fill in vacant commercial areas, and the downtown plan recommends increased commercial development. So our proposed policy is to establish an administrative zoning compliance certification process. So that would be something that Angela could sign off on. It wouldn't have to go in front of a board or a commission. And it would just ensure that whatever use is moving into that existing space is permitted in the district. And we're also suggesting that the village consider retrofit standards. So that would require minor updates to building exteriors and sites if there are any new standards that are adopted in the new code that the building doesn't comply with. Any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, we had a meeting with the fire chief, I believe it was last week, pertaining to subletting of office spaces. And he said a lot of times they'll catch, during their fire inspections, they'll go into a building and they'll find out that the original purpose is not necessarily what's currently going on there. Or they may have added to what the original purpose was
Exactly,
with something that doesn't really fit.
right.
So they catch a lot of them that way.
And that's maybe an accidental catching of the issue. This is really proposing there to be a more established process so that
Right.
doesn't happen so much.
That's where thank you. That's where I was gonna go with it, because like you said, the trigger is a building permit, but something a passive subletting
Right.
is under the table,
Yes.
unknown. So what is there in a established standard that controls that?
So you don't have any standards currently that would require that. So that's why we're proposing that the administrative compliance certification process be established. So that would require that they receive the certification prior to establishing the new use.
Something that the landlord becomes responsible for?
Yes.
Ultimately responsible.
Right, the property owner's responsibility to inform new tenants that they would need to receive the certification.
So just to make sure, I mean, the thought process is that if I'm the landlord, I want to sublet my facilities for someone to use a different business than my own, that I am, that individual does not have to seek, would not under, and as we think about it, would not have to themselves seek an administrative variance or whatever, but the landlord would be responsible for it.
The landlord would ultimately be responsible for it, but then could require that the tenants receive the certification.
Right. And thoughts about the certification process, would it be similar to what we currently do now?
I think it would be much more simplified than what is currently required. It would be, I think someone just come to the counter, fill out a form. Angela would check, or Angela's staff would check that permitted or the use that they're proposing against the zoning code, ensure that it is a permitted use in that district. If it's not, would direct them to go through a special use process or conditional use process. If there's additional standards they would have to meet, she would then verify that the building meets those additional standards.
Because we have situations, and I think the board can, where we, tenants or prospective tenants, and it's not always the subletting, but they will show up at a zoning board meeting with a request to make a change. The landlord or the primary tenant or owner doesn't appear.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are questions that are asked that they can't answer. And so any thoughts about how dealing with those, how that can be handled?
What kind of requests do they come to the board with?
Well, they're just, a standard situation is where someone comes in and they want to rent a unit.
And it might be a parking variance associated with
Yeah,
it too.
right, a variance, right. And the question becomes, can they do it? Should they be the
Mhm.
person
Should it be the
doing
property owner?
Especially if it involves changes to the property itself.
Mhm. If it involves changes to the property, that's typically the property owner who would be required to be the applicant for those situations. I think for the zoning compliance certification, though, the prospective tenant could be the one receiving that and then give that to the landlord or the property owner for verification prior to signing the lease.
So could we put something like that into our new policy that, I think the last case was for was it a beauty shop or a gym?
It's a fitness
Oh, the one, yeah,
A lot of questions that we had
right.
They weren't
tenant
able to answer.
wasn't able to answer. Can we require that the
That they,
property owner or representative?
I think typically the requirement is that they sign off on the application so that you know that they approve whatever variance or whatever they are requesting. I think we could look into whether requiring the landlord or a representative of the property owner to come to the meeting is something that we could do.
Well, this was a commercial office building. The owner was in on the previous meeting a couple of years back and attested to the square footage. In this last meeting, the square footage was different. The landlord, the owner of the building, was not present.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is,
so the
that's the
person, the
mystery.
person requesting the variance couldn't answer that question.
Right, yeah. I think at those circumstances, it would be very helpful to have the property owner there, and we can definitely get with the village attorney and make sure we can include that requirement going forward.
Because what we would then have to do is postpone the case until our next meeting and have the landlord or representative of the landlord come in so they could answer the questions.
We can
And
also
that just
look,
slows down the process for the participant.
definitely, and we can also look at the application submittal requirements and ensure that we're requiring all of the information you all need to make good decisions, and ensure that that information is verified prior to the meetings, so that we don't have those circumstances.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to our next topic, which is limiting personal service and medical office uses. So there's been a recent proliferation of personal service and medical office uses in the downtown. If you do a Google Maps search for salons, I think about 12 or 15 pop up, which is quite a bit in a downtown area. So currently, salon and spa establishments are special uses in your B1 and your B2 district, and permitted uses in the B3 and the B4. And personal service and professional office uses are permitted uses in all of your business districts. So for existing policy, both the comprehensive plan and the downtown plans recommend that the downtown become a destination for dinner and entertainment that attracts visitors from throughout the region. So based on that, our proposed policy is to ensure downtown remains a destination by limiting the use of ground floor spaces to retail, dining, and entertainment uses. Any thoughts on the proposed policy?
I think it's to the point, you know, we have had several personal service applications and an overabundance of those types of facilities. So when we talk about limiting, what are we talking about?
So many communities
Well, that's what special uses do, is try to
Yes.
limit, but where's the teeth in limiting?
So special use is one approach. A lot of communities also restrict those types of uses from occupying ground floor retail spaces in a downtown area. So they can be in the upper floors. A lot of your downtown buildings do have multiple floors. So you could have businesses on both floors, but wanting to keep those ground floor spaces for the more vibrant commercial uses that generate more foot traffic and really contribute to the feel of the downtown and the vibrancy of the downtown.
But currently, the buildings that, I think most of the buildings that have a second floor, those are all apartments.
Are they residences?
So how does that fit in? I mean, if I'm renting an apartment on the second floor, do I want a gym next to me?
A gym, perhaps not, but a hair salon might not be as big of a
Or a
nuisance.
personal trainer?
Sure, I think we would definitely want to look at the types of personal service or medical use. I'm not sure, do fitness facilities fall under personal service?
They're learning centers.
Learning centers. So again, something we need to provide more specific regulations for. So that's the type of more specific use that we would want to establish to ensure we have standards, maybe a separation from residential uses, to ensure there's a proper distance or buffering between the different types of uses. I think that would be important to establish more specific regulations for all the different types of uses that we could see being appropriate in upper floors or ground floor spaces downtown.
I can't think of any of the two-story buildings in the downtown, the second floors. It's not either apartments or condos. Are you aware of any, Angela?
There is the space over where Vicky's jewelry is right now. There are offices above that space.
Where's that?
Where Civility was for a long time. That corner, Martin and Ridge.
Southeast corner of Ridge.
Oh, okay.
Those are offices. There aren't a lot. There are a few maybe on Dixie.
Okay.
The number of salons licensed.
I have a question along these lines. It seems like, I mean, just to talk about medical offices in general, I mean, I know we have a lot of dentists and some ophthalmologists or optometrists.
Optometrist.
To get it right, but just to make the distinction, some of the, I mean, I would say that there probably were more pure doctors' buildings or offices a dozen years ago. Lately, we haven't, I can't recall, and please correct me, we haven't had any need to address any variances for what would be a medical office. Some of the petitioners that have come our way are quasi-medical practices. You know, they were getting into some of the exotic.
Holistic.
Right, exactly.
Holistic health.
So that's a comment. The question is, are we trying to discourage real, I'm gonna use that words, real and true medical offices, or could you
That's the
maybe
question for you
clarify?
all, I guess. So we heard that there is the proliferation of these personal service and medical office uses was potentially a detriment to the downtown.
But they're you know, I'm going to use the word
Sure.
quasi.
I
I
think
mean, it's not that we're dealing with a doctor of dentistry or a MD or you know, ophthalmologist, optometrist, whatever. We're dealing with some exotic, or we had at least one petition that was potentially getting into some exotic stuff that was, and it wasn't clear whether it was regulated by the Department of Registration and Education or whatever they call themselves now. But
Was
again,
that the
just,
one for dry tattooing
yeah,
in Southgate?
yeah, exactly. But my point is, it strikes me that, as I said as the prelude to my question, traditional MDs, the presence of traditional MD offices has probably diminished over the years. You know, the doctors are more likely to be close to the hospital where they have practicing rights. And these medical uses are, like I say, they're kind of quasi. So I say this just to provoke reflection and discussion next time around, I guess.
So I think
what kind of medical uses are we looking to encourage or discourage here?
So I think typically the safest approach would be to regulate the use, not the user. So looking at medical offices and the I guess how those uses function rather than who is using the space or the building itself. So definitely wanting to focus on that use. So we can look at defining medical offices more specifically if we think that's important. But I think looking at how the building is used, how the space is used, and if there really is no distinction between the MD's office and the holistic medicine office, I would typically those would be regulated in the same way, as long as everyone's licensed and legal.
Yeah, but apart from the central business district, you have other neighborhood shopping areas where there's been a proliferation of personal service applications that we've received. Southgate, for example, I think the last time it was like 30% of spas or day spas or barber shops. Now that's a concentration within a small grouping of stores. Now that shouldn't be in a new ordinance review.
So the clustering of these types of uses is interesting. I'm surprised the market supports all of them, to be honest. But I think when we're looking at our downtown, the current policy, the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan really provide strong direction as to what we want the downtown to be. We want it to be a vibrant shopping and entertainment district. We're attracts visitors from all throughout the region and is somewhere Homewood residents really want to go and hang out. And it's a big public gathering space. Your commercial corridors, those are more appropriate for those personal service types uses. So we wouldn't want to regulate those out of Homewood altogether. People still need to get their hair cut. They still need to go to the doctor. They still need to, do all those other personal service types of things. But your other commercial corridors, other commercial areas are more appropriate for those types of uses rather than the downtown.
But we're only speaking for the B1 district.
Exactly.
And if we're going to be talking about encouraging second floor use, are we bringing up the question of ADA accessibility?
Yeah,
That is always a question, and that can be a tricky one. Typically with the older historic buildings, they are required to meet the standards of the building code at the time they were built. So ADA requirements would not always come into play for those uses or those buildings.
But if it becomes renovated, then it kicks you into the new code.
Right, if you're doing, a big renovation to the building. But if that were true, then you would have the opportunity to install elevators or other lifts to get people into those spaces more easily.
Yeah, and without discriminating, and I think part of the zoning plan was to further economic diversity with the kinds of businesses. We do have a proliferation of salons, hair salons. There are 62, 63 in the village now. So, well,
Sorry.
yeah, one
Homewood likes to get their
for
haircut.
every 5 people. But it is, it becomes when you're looking at the village overall and, including outside of the B1 district, it is a concern because you do want to encourage other types of businesses in the B2 and other B3, B4 districts. So while I think, these changing, the geographic location, second floor, whatever, those kinds of things will help. I do think, as we're studying this and the village and that we think about that too, maybe broadly, without necessarily looking at any one kind of personal use. So,
Definitely, I
as
think
you
if
stated.
we wanted to consider making them all special uses rather than permitted uses, so there would be that process to approve. That could be something to consider, just to make that extra step in the process to maybe just discourage some kind of pop-up businesses that you might see. Ready for the next topic?
Yep.
All right. So the next one is short-term rentals. So we have heard that short-term rentals have been disrupting the neighborhood residential character, being used as party houses, where people will they'll rent the home for one evening, have a big party, and then it'll disrupt neighbors and can be a nuisance. And could also potentially impact housing affordability if folks are coming in and purchasing homes to use only as Airbnbs rather than as their primary residence. It could over time impact housing affordability in the village. So current regulation, the code doesn't address short-term rentals. Airbnb, VRBOs were not a thing back in 2002. So now that they are, we definitely want to address them in the new code. As far as existing policy, again, the comprehensive plan doesn't have any direct recommendations or policy about short-term rentals, but it does recommend that the village assure a diversity of quality homes for residents. So wanting to use that as direction for our proposed policy, which would be to establish standards for short-term rentals, including a requirement to receive a permit so that the village is aware of all of the short-term rental properties that are within the community, and then also to limit short-term rentals to owner-occupied residences. I think most people would not want to rent out their home for big parties if that's where they live primarily. So that is one way of helping to kind of curb that behavior and make neighborhoods more focused on the residents that live there.
What are your thoughts about some villages that require a fee?
That is, so a lot of communities will have a fee or like a hotel tax that they'll apply to short-term rentals. I think we had the conversation with the village attorney, and there was some issue with the local ability to establish those additional fees or
I believe
taxes
Tinley Park regulates it that way.
with a fee.
Yes.
I think if there was a fee associated with the permit, that would be definitely something that could
A
be
natural
allowed.
process.
Right. I think so I think the village is limited in its ability to require licenses or taxing.
What period of time is considered a short-term rental?
So typically, so the state of Wisconsin actually just passed legislation that would allow municipalities to limit short-term rentals. So the shortest period that you could restrict it to would be 7 days up to 30. So if you wanted it, you could have the minimum stay be at least 7 days or the maximum stay be at least 30 days.
Okay.
But the state of Illinois does not have any similar legislation.
They do not?
No.
Okay. Nothing else?
Well, just clarifying question again. So what you're saying, the minimum, we could regulate it by a minimum stay of 7 days?
That is one approach.
Okay.
In the state of Wisconsin, that was the longest minimum that a municipality is able to establish. The municipality could choose for 1 day to be the minimum stay.
Okay.
But it was
Right.
up to 7 would be the minimum that the municipality could establish. Since the state of Illinois doesn't have similar legislation, it would be up to the municipality to set that minimum.
The language you have is limit the use to residential lots with owner-occupied residential uses only. Does that preclude townhomes and other similar type of,
It would not if they were owner occupied. Typically, a landlord would restrict subletting an apartment without, permission from the property owner. But if the townhome or a condo were owned by the person living there, the primary resident, and it was, good with their HOA requirements or any other types of covenants that go along with those types of properties, then this would apply to them as
how
well.
would the condo be considered? A condo is a concrete block on the second or third floor. And it's not a residential lot.
I guess that might be confusing language. It should say residential uses.
Okay, so it should be reworded.
Yeah, we can reword that.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to our next topic, which is home-based businesses. So as we all know, with COVID-19, there was a huge number of people who started working remotely from their homes. But currently the code requires all of those people to receive a permit because it doesn't distinguish between businesses that are like headquartered from a residence versus people just working remotely. So this is a distinction that COVID has really required a lot of municipalities to make, because if we all went in to get a permit to work from home, I don't think Angela would ever have a day off. So the existing policy, the comprehensive plan recommends that residents be able to access employments with incomes that support home ownership. So again, not something that is a direct tie to home-based businesses, but provides the direction that the village wants to support employment. So we should look at the proposed policy, which would be to distinguish between home-based businesses and individuals that work from home, and allow people that are just working from home to not require a permit.
That's pretty easy.
Yes, I would say so. Back in 2002, I don't think we had the internet to work from home, so. All set to go on to the next topic? All right.
Yep.
So the next one is the retroactive permitting for 2 and 3 flats. So currently there are some 2 flats and 3 flats in your R1 and your R2 or your single family districts. But since they are not allowed, they're not permitted or special uses within those districts, they can't be reconstructed if they're destroyed. So if they burn down in a fire, the homeowner couldn't rebuild that as a 2 or 3 flat like it was originally. So that really complicates property purchase. It's hard to get a mortgage if you have that risk associated with your property, and it could also discourage reinvestment. If I know if something happens to my property, I won't be able to rebuild it. Why would I invest a lot of money to make it nicer? So the current regulation does not have any retroactive permitting process for illegally established uses. So the issue with the 2 and 3 flats, they were established such a long time ago. There's no real record of whether they were legally established or not. It's not clear whether at the time they were built, if they were allowed in those districts. So we would be looking at I guess the existing policy before we get into our proposed policy. So the comprehensive plan recommends a diversity of quality housing that maintains the village's appearance. So encouraging reinvestment in those properties would be along those lines. So to allow people to reinvest in those properties, to legalize these 2 and 3 flats, we're proposing that the village establish a retroactive permitting process that would bring those properties into conformity with the code, and then they would be able to rebuild if they got destroyed.
I have a question. I'm sure the village has gone through this with consultants in the past. And the last time that it was done, was this considered illegal? Or is this something that has come about as a result of legislation?
That's a good question, and that's something that we discussed, and we really don't have an answer.
So it was missed by the consultants in the past.
Or it just wasn't an issue. I honestly.
See, I would say it was ignored.
Yes.
Right.
Because, I mean, just going back in history, quite a few years,
Yeah.
I'm sure that we all can remember different situations. I know I had 2 situations on my block where one was a single-family house, single-family zoning, but it had the house tricked out for literally a separate apartment on the 2nd story. And then the other situation on my block was a matter of, there was one house, 2 lots, however, and the house lot was R1, but the other lot, which is where the garage was R2 or R3. And I mean, I'm just throwing that out as one example. I mean, we, over the years, I'm sure we all could remember, pick a block and could probably identify a situation exactly like this. But now I have a question. When you're recommending this, are you aware of how other communities deal with this issue?
Yes, definitely. So we worked in Bloomington recently.
Bloomington, Illinois?
Yes.
Okay.
So they have a neighborhood surrounding their downtown that has a lot of very beautiful historic homes that are humongous and are really not economically feasible to maintain if you're not very well off. So a lot of those homeowners have converted them into multifamily uses and have done so illegally. When we were updating those district standards, the community came out and said, we love our historic homes. We don't want them to be run down. We want people to continue reinvesting in them. And we like the mix of housing that we have, the apartments next door to the single family homes, next door to the duplexes. So they really liked that housing diversity. So we established a retroactive permitting process for those illegally established units. It required a lot of work on the city's part of doing a survey of all of the existing units, ensuring to really snap a chalk line at when this code is adopted. These were the units that were there, and they require a permit. And then anything that comes in after that would have to then comply with the new standards for the district.
So that would be essentially, I'm going to use the word rezoning or something, or what special use? I mean, how would that be characterized?
So in Bloomington, we did handle it as a new zoning district that was established for, we called it the RD, the Downtown Neighborhoods District. We would not necessarily have to do that here. We could establish in the R1 and the R2 district existing 2 and 3 flats as of the date of the adoption of this ordinance that have received a permit as being permitted uses, so that no new 2 and 3 flats could be built in your single family neighborhoods, but the ones that exist now could remain, could be reinvested in, could be rebuilt if they were destroyed.
Okay, now this provokes another question. So by creating or addressing this instead of ignoring it, would this then encourage other people to convert their second floor into an apartment?
I would say no, because the retroactive permit would only be made available for 2 and 3 flats that were built at the time of the adoption of the ordinance. So new 2 and 3 flats, or if you were going to or convert your single family home to multiple units, that would not be permitted, so it would still be illegally established.
So essentially, it needs to make that exclusion. It needs to be very, right.
Yes.
So it needs to be an exclusion.
Exclusion.
You can't have a tear down and then build a 2 or 3 flat.
You couldn't tear down your
could tear-
single family home and build a 2 or 3 flat, but if you have a 2 or 3 flat and it's destroyed, then you could rebuild that.
Right.
Okay.
Ready to move on to our next topic? So the next one's going to sound very similar to the last one with the retroactive permitting of the 2 and 3 flats. But before I get into it, I do want to clarify the distinction between the two. So our 2 and 3 flat would be a building where there are 2 units that are very similar in size. The layout's very similar. The building is those 2 or 3 units. Whereas an accessory dwelling unit, there would be the principal single family home and then a much smaller appurtenant dwelling unit. They're often called granny flats, secondary dwellings. They can really support multi-generational living, which is becoming much more common these days. So ADUs are not currently allowed in the village, but can be that effective tool to provide housing diversity without disrupting the village's single-family character. So they can really be tucked away within residential neighborhoods in a way that you can't tell that they are there from the street. So the current regulation does not include any standards for accessory dwelling units, and then your existing policy recommends, again, that diversity of quality homes. So our proposed policy would be to allow accessory dwelling units as a permitted use when they are within a single family building and as a special use when they're in a detached building. We would also recommend that standards be established that would control the bulk, the character, the architecture of the accessory dwelling unit to ensure that you really can't tell from the street, from the right of way, that it exists.
Clarification. So one could create or convert the second story into a granny flat. Now, with respect to the special use, whatever, I'm presuming that we would have all sorts of standards
Yes.
where this would be allowed relating to existing lot size, percentage impervious coverage, whether or not separate driveway.
So typically we would require there be the single driveway that would serve the principal and the accessory dwelling, that they would have off-street parking available to them that isn't a tandem spot with the required parking for the single family use, that there be, if there is a separate entrance from the primary dwelling unit, that entrance be on the side or the rear so you can't see it from the street. And then also good standards for the appearance of the accessory dwelling unit to ensure that it is really blending in with the principal building and the residential character of the neighborhood.
But this would sort of self-police itself depending on lot size.
Right, so I think the typical approach would be if it's an internal accessory dwelling unit, it would be a percentage of the size of the entire principal building. If it is a detached building, then it would be a percentage of the size of the lot.
Okay, if I have a detached garage, which is rather large, and I want to put a second floor in there,
Definitely be restricted, we have a height restriction, so you couldn't go taller than the principal building.
no, if it was within the,
Sure, then yes, that
my
would,
garage is built, I just have all this empty space up there, so I put a second floor in. Can I now rent that out?
You
Or
could.
have a family member live in there? Okay, because currently we do not allow that.
exactly.
And do we want to allow that?
That's the question for you all.
Right.
Would this
back
require a
into
relaxation?
Yeah.
Would this require a relaxation of the building of the lot? The present ordinance?
The building coverage standards?
Correct.
Typically, no. Their building coverage standards would allow for garages to be built, detached garages to be built. So those same standards would apply. You wouldn't be allowed to have a detached garage and then another detached accessory dwelling unit. It would sort of be a one or the other, or like he said, a second floor type approach.
No, I'm thinking of the detached. Okay.
Only one detached.
Right. Couldn't fill up your backyard with a bunch of accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, we recently had a case with a detached garage. And it was a nice, very nice sized garage. And he had a water line run to it.
Right.
And we told him you can't do that. Because you run a water line, now you got this, what he was calling a workshop, could automatically turn into a
Dwelling unit.
small dwelling unit.
So this would be a departure of how you all currently regulate things. That's why we wanted to bring the idea before you, before we updated the code to include these types of standards. So if it's not something that you find amenable, not something that you think would really fit in Homewood, we don't need to consider it any further.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. So moving into our next topic, sustainable design and open space preservation. So the issue is the village is really limited in its ability to restrict the development of privately owned land. So we would like to look at innovative approaches to address the village's environmental concerns. So current regulations, open space is required through the minimum yard setbacks, but there are no current standards for rain gardens, native plant species, tree preservation, or impervious surface. So in terms of your existing policy, the comprehensive plan recommends that the village work with the park district to acquire open space parks and recreation facilities to support new development. And then for our proposed policy, we recommend establishing sustainable design standards and impervious surface and/or the building coverage limits that you have currently. And then revising your standards of review for discretionary approvals, for your variances, your special use permits, to ensure that the environmental impact of those uses is considered as a part of your decision making.
Anybody? Guess not.
All right.
Well, just,
No.
I thought of something. Not too long ago, we had it was in one of our deliberations. Keep it vague enough so it doesn't sound like I'm picking on anybody, but the whole idea, it's a redevelopment situation in the downtown area, and it seemed like a situation where it would have been rather easy for the developer to incorporate some of these things, with pervious pavement maybe, and subsurface storage and whatever. And it was, they weren't, I would say that there wasn't a spirit of cooperation. Let's just leave it at that. So something like this might address something like that, especially the retroactive nature of it.
So I think if that development got approved without these types of elements, then they would be able to, be a non-conforming to these standards if they were adopted. But if there was any substantial redevelopment or rehabilitation to the building, then they would have to comply with the new standards.
So then that's, I guess, the ultimate question. We could essentially impose something like that if it was either a change in use,
So change in use.
a new building.
Yes, a new building. If they were expanding the building, the expansion would have to comply with these standards. Parking lots often come into play when you talk about impervious surfaces
Sure.
and some of the native landscaping elements. That's where a lot of our stormwater is generated.
Right.
So if we're expanding parking lots, you have to comply with the new standards. And then any new development coming forward would of course have to comply with the standards.
Okay.
So it's common that developers don't want to play ball with those types of requirements. So that's why those types of elements. So that's why we require them. They don't have a choice.
I'm sure the audience has some questions on this one. Maybe you should open it up to them.
So that building will probably be done before
Right.
this goes through.
Yeah.
But it definitely is a balancing act. We want to make Homewood a developer unfriendly or a business unfriendly community. There's definitely a balance between the two that we'll be able to reach with you all. All right. Are you going to open it up for public comment?
Or do we go through the other topics?
We're gonna let
think
the
that
public
that's the
comment on
last.
these first.
Okay.
and then we'll do the other.
Open up in the public.
All right, does anybody have any questions they would like to bring up about what we just recently talked about? If you do, go up to the microphone and please state your name.
My name's Liz Barmecki. I live here in Homewood, in Old Homewood. Are we questioning, or this is just the time for our 3-minute comment?
It's time for your 3-minute comment.
Okay.
No?
These are comments on what we just discussed, comments or questions.
Right.
Oh, perfect. I'm down for that. Okay. So I'd like to thank the commissioners, the village, and Housel Levine Associates for listening to the community tonight. And I'd also like to ask that additional opportunities for the community input be offered. As the village knows, Thursdays and summer are a busy time. The zoning code appears to be only updated about once every 20 years, so this rewrite will impact our village until 2041, just for some perspective. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of statistics, but we all know that in the coming 20 years, the climate catastrophe will have major real-life effects on us all. I plan to still be in Homewood then. I'm in my forever home here, as are many others in this community. That's why this process needs to be as open and accessible as possible, including meeting and workshop times and days varied. I'm not an expert in civil engineering, city planning, or legislation. I've spent the last month researching ways that we can make this rewrite as a positive advancement. The rewrite can be a solution to so many of the problems the community faces, but one of the most obvious that even our children understand is that we should not have residentially zoned property adjacent to or abutting industrial or manufacturing zones in any way. As someone who can see the CN yard from their back patio, I understand that we can't undo what's been done in the past, but the code can prevent this from happening in the future. The village's use of the zoning code to solve an identified problem in the community is progress and responsiveness to the concerns of residents and protecting the character of our community. I ask, as I have in this room several times, what proactive ways can the village and this zoning code rewrite, protect our green spaces? The community was buoyed by this commission's vote against the severely lacking rezoning application for the Calumet Country Club. But had their application been more thorough, that rezoning could have been recommended by this commission and approved by the Board of Trustees. At every opportunity, we need to look at ways to protect large and medium-sized parcels of green space in our village. Homewood is home to several golf clubs and country clubs, some more successful than others. The village must prepare for the reality that these may be put up for sale and must codify what uses the community is willing to see in these spaces under new ownership. I ask that the zoning code rewrite include every possible measure to protect green spaces through historic preservation, tree protection, flood mitigation, habitat for migrating birds, and anything else applicable. The zoning code rewrite should be seen as an opportunity to bring this community together after a tumultuous winter and spring. But more importantly, this rewrite could allow our village to make real steps toward becoming a model of sustainability and green initiatives, not just here in the Southland, but across the country. Global warming and climate change are happening with huge economic costs at governments of all levels. Though we are a relatively small community, we can make an impact both as an example and on the local costs we bear as climate change becomes more destructive and expensive. Thank you for your time, and I really hope that we can pursue the sustainability initiatives that were in the questionnaire and that are mentioned here.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is David Sachs. I'm a resident of Flossmoor. I'll hit on some of those same topics that Ms. Vermecke just did. The first thing, want to just really reiterate that looking through all this all looks very good. Happy with a lot of this, but yeah, there's nothing in there about context-based or form-based zoning of residential areas abutting industrial areas. And, like Liz said, obviously I'm in Flossmoor, I live along the same train tracks, diesel trains going by. There's not much you can do about that at this point, the way things are built. But certainly with what we just went through, the idea of building new industrial developments right next to residential neighborhoods, that needs to be addressed by our zoning. Industrial zoning has the least restrictions typically, residential has the most. So you can't just look at a parcel of land and say, oh, it's zoned industrial, we can do whatever we want now. We can write that into our zoning codes, and they don't have that currently. And it's a huge issue that would have preemptively made things much easier for the village if that had been in place. So really want to hit upon that. That kind of zoning needs to be written into this if we're updating everything for the first time in 20 years. I do want to address the amount of public meetings, and I don't know quite how to phrase this as a question, but we're having this meeting tonight. We have another one in 6 months in January, and I'll sort of say my piece, and then maybe you can address this before the next person speaks. And then there's another meeting 11 months later in November, and those are the times for public participation. And initially we know from emails that we've read between the village and everything, there's originally supposed to be 6 of them. There's supposed to be workshops. It was supposed to involve the community much more directly. And so some of this can't be solved by the law firm, but the zoning board here can choose to have more meetings about this. And I'd really just sort of like to know what is happening in the next 6 months before the public is invited to participate again. What is happening in the 11 months after that before the public is invited to participate again? And how can we have more consistent public participation throughout the process? And on that point, I want to say in Flossmoor, we have a Green Commission. And that Green Commission is there made up of additional residents, and they would be involved in an issue like this with the zoning rewrites and the zoning updates. And Homewood has nothing like this. And also, given a lot of the context of what we've just been through, which I won't go into though, an Environmental Justice Commission would really make a lot of sense for the village of Homewood. We're talking about air pollution levels down here in the south suburbs that almost put us into a non-attainment area as far as the EPA is concerned, also given our minority population. So there's real issues here that need to be addressed that can be addressed by our zoning that would also help there be more consistent public participation if Homewood had an Environmental Justice Commission, a Green Commission, and if that's not happening in the meantime, I want to know how the public can continue to be part of this conversation. And that's about all I have. So there's my 3 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Can you address what's happening in the next 6 months?
For sure. So after we have tonight's workshop, we'll really be moving into step 2, the diagnostics report and preliminary recommendations framework. So that's when we do our deep dive into the code and identify all of the issues and opportunities with your existing regulations, and then develop our preliminary recommendations for the update. So there isn't another workshop scheduled to review that with the public, but it will be made available on the project website. If you provide your email address on the sign-up sheet and on the table in the entry hall, we will email you and provide you a link to that memo, and you can provide all of your feedback online or through the village Dropbox.
Is it possible for this board to invite the public to review those documents in a public setting like this, to have it on the agenda in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, my name is Rachel Smith, resident of Governor's Park, actually. So, okay, really quick to what you just said about how the deep dive in the next 6 months and all that. Is that typically the turnaround time for a deep dive into a municipal code?
So we actually are delivering the diagnostic report in the end of August, and then reviewing that with staff in September. Then we get into step 3, which is the actual updating the different code sections, and that'll take us into November for that first code section.
Okay, all right, well, that's good to know, thank you. I guess my other quick question here is, during the last time I was in front of all of you, I had asked the developer that was there at the time about being held accountable to LEED standards and green sustainability and things like that, how to mitigate the floods and stormwater and everything like that. And they mentioned that there isn't anything like that in our code, just like the firm here is, and I can't stress enough how much that's actually very, very important. It's one thing to have the older buildings such as the one that we're standing in or things like that to come up to LEED standards. That's a challenging thing and sometimes not always applicable. But if we are going to be talking about any kind of new building or any kind of new industrial building, these are things that are of great concern. You know, my house is in Governor's Park, which has had flooding issues in the past. And I'm very, very nervous about what happens when you take a massive green field and pave it over. So I strongly implore for those things to be put in and as hard and final as like, yo, you gotta do this. My next quick question is, underneath the sustainable design and open space preservation, when it says that the resident are recognizing that the village is limited in its ability to restrict the development of privately owned land, are we talking about my residential or privately owned across the board?
Across the board.
Okay, so we could make it tighter on developers that buy large pieces of land, like Calumet Country Club, or potentially like Coyote Run, if that ever went up for sale or anything like that, we could make them, well, I don't know, Coyote Run's in Baltimore, but still, nonetheless, so. Yes, that's the other one. So we could actually make that tighter, right? Like we could, this is our opportunity.
Yes, so the issue is you can't totally restrict, you can't require if the golf course to remain open space. You can't take their ability to develop the property completely away, but you can restrict what a type of development goes on those types of properties.
Could we restrict the size of said development? Like you can't pave over 30%. Like I know in my yard, once we built our garage and all that, after our inspections and stuff, we were told you can put a patio on, and after that, we can't put any more hard surface in our yard.
Yep, so the village currently has building coverage limits. A lot of other communities also establish impervious surface limits.
Okay.
So you have what your primary building could be, what your accessory buildings could be, but also then your driveways, your walkways, those types of things would fall under your impervious surface limits.
Okay, cool. Well, we need those two.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Hi, Michelle Yates. I'm a resident here in Homewood. Thank you for being here with us. I'm really glad to see that there's a sustainable design and open space preservation topic on here. But this seems really big, and like this is actually multiple policies. Is that
Yes.
the plan then?
For sure. I think the policy is one, it provides us the direction to establish multiple standards, multiple
Okay.
requirements.
Yeah, because it seems that based on the survey data, residents want more eco-friendly and sustainable zoning, basically. So like permeable surfaces, but, you know, I would also add, you know, water efficient landscaping and, you know, things to encourage stormwater management features, more zoning codes around solar panels and renewable energy, and also allowing for exceptions to code for renewable energy standards. More codes emphasizing the reuse of existing buildings on properties and historic resource preservation. I guess that's, and I want to echo some of the things that other people have also talked about here. In terms of, greater restrictions on manufacturing districts, which are the least restrictive, being abutted to residential, which are the most restrictive. And our zoning code, doesn't explicitly restrict that per se, but our, zoning code definitely talks about these being incompatible districts. And it would be nice to push that even further, right? I also want to echo, the establishment of an environmental justice commission or a green commission as well. I think that would be like a fantastic addition to our community and would extend what the village already considers to be a commitment to like environmental sustainability. But I think it would be really great to have that kind of voice in this process too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Amy Cross. I'm in, is this working?
It is.
It goes to the Zoom
It goes to the
meeting.
Zoom.
Oh, okay. So I'm also across the street from the golf course there. So I wanted to just start, I had two things I want to bring up. So I'll share kind of a little part of my bio. And I wanted to say there is a point to this, so bear with me. So in my 30s, I developed a painful condition known as complex regional pain syndrome, formerly known as reflex sympathetic dystrophy. Blah, blah. And so I'm limited in mobility on one leg and foot and became completely wheelchair bound. So thankfully, after extensive physical therapy, I can walk some and even ride a bike for a while. That's how I got here today. And so yay, Homewood on the bike paths. But still not enough to kind of complete errands without the motorized scooters and things like that. And so that's actually what brought me to Homewood. We kind of searched far and wide, north, south, not east because that would have been the lake, but west. And we went, more than an hour in each direction, finally landing in Homewood. So, in this search, so many of our neighborhoods had preserved natural spaces that were way out of reach for us financially, except for Homewood. So anyway, I'll shorten this, but for the first time in decades, I'm able to hear myself think again. I can hear birds chirp and have seen right in my own yard, blue jays, hummingbirds, even my favorite, the red-headed woodpecker, which I'm biased, and nearby coyote, deer, egret, and more. The nearby Calumet Country Club rezoning is what began my interest in preserving what is possible of the beautiful acreage in Homewood. And some have lived here a long time and seen the changes. I've only, again, been here 3 years, but I am really concerned about some of the proposed changes. I feel Homewood is really a hidden gem. And sorry, this is deep, only because it's just so personal, but so it's my hope, like all of us here, that we consider our non-human life and that diversity. Our diversity is a great aspect of Homewood that is unfortunately very rare, and I love that it's not diverse here by coincidence, but by design. We know that, from World Wildlife Federation, the journal Nature, Living Planet Report, and so many more, that 50% to 2/3 of our biodiversity has decreased in the last 50 years. So I'm also part of residents who want to make sure that an Environmental Justice Commission has a role in preserving Homewood's participation. So anyway, I will end that there, but I do want to say, you would be surprised, even with the ADA regulations and things, how inaccessible places are. I mean, you're at a hospital, you're on the ramp, and you're uphill like this trying to break it and open a door, and then you're turning. So I really want to encourage accessibility in going forward at least. And I do love the truck note, but I do want us to think about more, I guess, rather than focusing on what we're against, urging us to get excited about a vision for Homewood's future that builds on the beauty and diversity and inclusivity that we already have. So I wanted to add trees, yes.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Hillary Priest. I live in Scandia. I'm a 2-year Homewood resident, moved from Park Forest, which is also lovely, very green. I want to commend all of you for your vote on the contentious vote on the Calumet Country Club. I think there are a lot of wonderful ideas here. And I think there's a lot of great things that we can do to make Homewood better. And there are a lot of things that I'm for in this community. One of the things that really struck me about this presentation was the accessible dwellings unit. I am a member of Generation X. I have friends who are caring for their aging parents while simultaneously for their own families. And I do have some very good friends in Homewood who would have to leave the village were they not able to have some kind of accessory dwelling unit for a person, a disabled family member or a parent. And sometimes those accessory dwelling units can really make that kind of intergenerational family living possible. So I encourage the board to think about ways that we can make that accessible for residents, not just residents with ginormous lots, but still be tasteful, still be within the vision of the village. So I did note, I just like to encourage you to think about that. As you move forward with your plans, I'd also like to encourage the board to invite public comment as much as possible. A lot of work will happen, I'm sure, between now and the end of January, and we want to be involved. I'd also like to see into the coding some explicit ways to protect our green spaces. I understand business is desirable, but with industrial development, I'd like to see those green spaces stay green as much as possible while attracting businesses without making it completely unattractive for them to come here. And I understand that that is a delicate balance. I also want to echo the other speakers in their recommendation of maybe considering some kind of an environmental justice coalition to bring the people in the area who want to help make sure that our community stays green, that we have an equitable division of industrial development in the Southland, which we know doesn't have the same kind of industrial development as the north and the west suburbs. What else? I think that's about it. And I really want to thank you for inviting us to participate. And we'd like to continue participating. We'd like to work together as we move forward to make Homewood the best place that we can make it, because I don't really want to move. Thank you.
Thank you. As far as your public comment, you can make public comments at any time to the village's website. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Johnson. I just have one quick question. For the zoning 101, you give a list of different types of zoning, but it doesn't identify which type of zoning Homewood goes by.
So that's a fair point. So the current code is the Euclidean type of zoning. We would likely move forward to a more hybrid approach, where we still have our zoning districts. We have the types of uses that are allowed in each district, but we also have some form-based standards to control the appearance of buildings, how sites are developed, et cetera.
So Euclidean is the most restrictive?
it's differently restrictive, I guess. So Euclidean is the very traditional form of zoning. It was the type of zoning that was first allowed federally and by states. So it creates districts where you have your industrial uses here, your residential uses over here, and your commercial uses over here, and you don't have a lot of mix between them. Form-based codes really focus on what the building looks like rather than the use that's inside of the building. So we're probably going to look at a hybrid approach where you have elements of both. And we can clarify that zoning 101 to say what the village currently has. That would be helpful.
Hello.
Good evening.
I just want to start off by saying that I do have high hopes for this process, but I am very, I'm sorry. My name is Casey Kelso. I'm a resident of Homewood. So yeah, I do have high hopes for the process, but I am very upset at the lack of the community's involvement in the process. The survey, the presentation, there's also some really good ideas. I liked the Post-it note activity we did, but there's proof that the citizens were cut out of the process to save a few grand. It's not really timely when your citizens do have mistrust in you at the moment, but it's still not too late to restore those changes, so that you would consider that. Because Homewood brought in many of us, within the last few years. I know I moved here 5 years ago. And that was around the time of the Think Homewood campaign. And that campaign and kind of like the feeling of people moving in and kind of made Homewood feel like a sort of beacon of hope of what like a future community could look like. So I feel like that's a lot of the people that you've been hearing about in the last 6 months. And we're very passionate about living here. But if the zoning codes updates only happen once every 20 years, I do think that the people of Homewood deserve to play a role in the actual decision of the end of this process. I think the outcome of this should be put to some sort of vote or referendum so that the citizens can decide if the zoning code represents our future the way that we see it. It would also give the citizens a chance to digest the new zoning code before it's put into place, and it would place more accountability on the Planning and Zoning Commission. It would make me, and I'm sure many others, feel more at ease if we know that we actually get to help make the decision. So yeah, I want us to restore the community's involvement in the process, including restoring the workshops, putting the final document to a public vote. We should consider creating an environmental justice commission. And the Calumet Country Club is not the only golf course in the area. We have multiple golf courses. We know that membership is going down over the years, so this can likely happen again. And those should be preserved as open lands. And that should somehow be included to work with the Parks District to acquire those when they eventually do close at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Fully vaccinated, I have at-risk family members, so I still like to mask up. My name is Cara Notarangelo, Reverend Cara Notarangelo, and I'm a Homewood resident. My partner and I bought our first home, our forever home here in October of 2020. I just want to thank you for your presentation today. I want to especially thank you for how you represented community response to the survey. That was really wonderful to see in a great way. That just made me even more proud of us deciding to live here. I'd just like to state that I support the call for an environmental justice commission and green commission. Spirit of cooperation is important. And I know that you already have a lot on your plate. Maybe that would help balance it out a little bit. I also would like to name that Homewood is a designated Tree City USA, and it's exciting to see this as an opportunity for healing, not only between between like the governmental aspect of Homewood and the citizens, but also as a way to continue to enhance the already existing community values of healthy communities, healthy green spaces in our future as a town. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jenna. I have lived in Homewood my whole life. I still live here. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak today. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the fact that we get the opportunity to speak today. And I was really disheartened to see that your firm had given us more opportunities to have more chances to talk, and the village cut that out. I would really like it if we had more of an opportunity to engage with the zoning board and with your firm so we could make some positive changes. I know there's a lot of mistrust with the village residents and the village itself, and I think this could really bring upon a lot of healing to our community if we were given this opportunity. I know that the residents really wanted to say, but I will also let you know from feedback from a lot of the residents, the survey was really difficult for many to take part in. The interactive map was not as successful as I think, some people would have hoped it to be. So there was a lot of people who had difficulty with it. So, you just might want to take that into perspective. And I think also then if we could get another workshop, those kinds of things, if you bring in the community, then they have a chance to understand what it is exactly what they're hoping to get out of it and you're hoping to get out of it. I really, truly believe that having an environmental justice commission here in Homewood would be so extremely beneficial. I really think that this is our future. This is my children's future. It's their future. We have an opportunity to make a vision for Homewood that is amazing and wonderful and green. And my daughter wants to see that. She's 14. She stood by me during this whole fight, cheering me on and saying, Mom, this is my town. This is my future. And it is. This is what we're doing this for. We need to be able to make sure that we have good sustainability, some eco-friendly building construction. Yes, there has to be a balance of business and there has to be a balance of sustainability. There just has to. This is our future and this is our children's future. And it's just so important that we are able to give them the opportunity to have trees, to have clean air to breathe, to be able to walk down their street safely. These are the things that our children want, and this is what we want for our children. I just really want to be able to mend the village and the residents, and I think this could be an amazing opportunity if we are given an opportunity to bring that bridge together. And I really think an environmental justice commission is the way to do it. Why not have people work alongside the zoning board and have it look through an environmental lens? That would be so amazing and wonderful. We could have, ways to make this village even more outstanding than it already is. So I urge you to please give us an opportunity to work with you. Please give us an opportunity to help our children. And please give us the Environmental Justice Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
And any feedback you have on how to make the questionnaire and the map.social more user-friendly, we're very open to that. We'd be happy to make any tweaks to make that more user-friendly for the residents here. Yeah, we have a paper version in the back if you want to mark that up and hand that to Angela or put it in the village Dropbox. We can make those tweaks going forward.
Really quickly, zoning language is kind of hard to digest for
Totally.
general public people if they're not familiar with it. And I think that was kind of some of the hangups. We really actually had to do a lot of research to figure it out. So that's just general.
And thank you for being open to those.
Of course. Yeah, any
Thank you.
feedback we have on that we'd be open to that.
Hi, my name is David Genova. I live in Gardner's Park. I'll keep it brief because you've heard a lot from me over the last few months. I just want to thank you for the presentation. Julie and Ramon, I wish the rest of the zoning commissioners were here today so I could thank you all in person. And I've got to thank 2 or 3 of you outside of this building. So thank you again for your vote against the rezoning of that land. Again, I'll keep it brief. I'll just come very quickly with, I don't think it would be a terrible idea for the village's zoning and ordinances moving forward to be unfriendly towards the idea of industrial zoning. Because I think when you look around the village and the way this village is built, I don't think there's a whole lot of space for us to put industrial zone spaces far enough away from residential homes. Commercial, feel free, bring in entertainment, anything you want, sports complexes, sure. Other than that, I think the idea of an environmental justice commission is fantastic. And I hope we get more opportunities than we've already offered to keep discussing this zoning and ordinance moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no more public comment. I've got a couple of slides to finish up.
Okay.
So we have some additional topics that really don't require policy direction from the village, but they are things we're going to explore in the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations memo. So things like setbacks for 6-foot tall fences and in corner front yards, parking pads. We know driveways can be rather narrow, so allowing that additional parking pad area so folks can park additional cars, allowances and standards for co-working spaces. So all of these things are items that we'll be diving deeper into in the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations memo. So if there are any additional policy topics that you think we omitted from the memo or we think we need to consider moving forward, we'd be happy to discuss those at this time.
I have a comment, and it's sort of a nebulous concept, but the fact that we haven't updated our zoning ordinance in 20 years is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it just happens that way.
If it's working, it's working, right?
Well, I'm not saying it's working, but I mean, it was all, I think most of us were here when that was changed, and the whole idea is, I know we addressed many of the situations that we quite often find ourselves in here, listening to petitions for some sort of variance or special use. So there's always that trade-off. But what I'm getting at is, from this point, we're talking about possibly another 20-year timeline with this. Before I talk about that going forward, what, in your experience, what's the typical time for zoning ordinance changes?
So the comprehensive amendments like this project, I mean, we've worked in communities where they haven't updated their code since the 1950s.
Right.
And others where it was 5 years ago where they did an update and it just didn't work out the way they wanted it. So
Right.
it really ranges community to community. You can't, I don't think, snap a chalk line and say 20 years is the ideal time to take another look at everything. Typically, we would recommend when you do a comprehensive plan or other type of long range planning project, taking a look at your zoning code, making sure that everything aligns with the recommendations in the plan. That can be every 10 years, every 15 years. It's just a good practice to ensure that any changes in how people are developing or how the village envisions itself moving forward can be addressed in your codes.
But my point with this is that we are a landlocked community. We're an older community in some ways established. And so it's not really a deficiency or a fault on our part to have not made a rather comprehensive changes to our zoning ordinance. I'd just like to throw that out as an idea.
I would agree with that. And I think we can, in the new code, we can organize it in a way to make it easier for you all to do those amendments over time in a way that doesn't result in sort of a Frankenstein code where you have standards all over the place that's kind of disorganized or more difficult to use. So we can make it easier for you guys to do those more piecemeal amendments, ensure the code is continually meeting the standards, the modern standards of today moving forward. So maybe a comprehensive update won't be necessary for 30 years or 40 years, depending on how we're looking at things at that time. It's hard to tell though.
Right, of course. However, we still have this, we're arbitrarily imposing this 20-year time horizon on what we're doing now as a guide for the next 20 years for everybody's forever homes. But in the past 20 years, there have been some, I would call them rather radical changes to certain uses in certain areas, and it's ironic that I'm going to throw out a couple of examples going back to medical buildings, but just to take sort of like a stroll down Dixie Highway in the Southgate area. I mean, there were, I would call them two rather large medical buildings. One's been converted to whatever, some sort of hybrid medical use, but the other one is an empty lot. The building, the practice moved on, reorganized, relocated, and blah, 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 blah. And the building was demolished, and now it's a vacant parcel. And my point is, this is more, again, for us to reflect, but I think with what we're doing here with the changes to on a comprehensive basis to the plan, we have to think about trying to be number one, flexible. I mean, who here can really predict the future? But secondly, we probably should, in our mind, start to think about, on a policy level basis, what to do with very radical changes to uses and buildings in our existing zoning districts. Using those examples of the medical buildings along Dixie Highway as an example. So with this change, you're talking about, let's call it the text, the words, is part of this also looking to make changes to our zoning districts?
We would take direction from the village on that. Some communities, they don't want to touch their zoning districts. They don't want to get into amending the map. Other communities want to rezone everything. So we will definitely take direction from you all, from staff, on the level of zoning map amendments we want to make. As a part of the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations, a step of the process, we do take a look at your existing districts and how existing development conforms with the standards of those districts. So looking at lot area and lot width minimums, especially in your residential areas, to see if there are a significant number of parcels that are below the minimum and requiring to come into you all to get a variance for simple things like a back porch or that type of thing. And in those circumstances, it might be appropriate to rezone certain parcels. There might be a need to have a new, perhaps, business park district or other type of transitional district between your industrial zones and your commercial and residential areas. So those could be things that we explore. And I think we would look at all of that in the diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations framework phase of the project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one question. We've been throwing the word open space around a lot. And maybe this is something Angela can help you with, or if you don't. What are we thinking about when we say open spaces? Do we have some idea what properties, whether they're parks or whether they're, is that kind of parks or park district, but what kind of those open space, larger, and I don't mean like the gap between two trees, but larger open spaces. Do we have a good feel for what's available
We
as
do
we're looking at environmental concerns?
well, I mean, our open spaces are zoned public lands and open spaces, it's a separate district. And they're all zoned that way at this time. You know, I don't know what, I guess we'd have to ask you what methods we can use to assure that that's preserved. If there's anything we can add to the zoning code.
I think having their own district is the best way of going about it. A lot of communities have their parks zoned in their residential districts, and that could potentially at some point open those up to residential development. But having them in their own open space, parks and open space district is a great way of preserving those over time, because that's the only thing you're allowed to do in those districts.
And I guess the standards for changing that zoning, looking at that, because if someone were to purchase, say, Rapid Slough, we'd have to look at the standards to help preserve that for the future if they come in with a zoning change.
Exactly. So if they're requesting a zoning map amendment and they want to develop their property in some way, looking at those standards for those properties, I think is an essential part of this process.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question with regards to the electric vehicles you mentioned. What's your appearance about that? Skokie and the city of Chicago have recently introduced and I believe passed ordinances regarding that. Skokie has them at their CTA bus stations. We recently passed a commercial development that had, I believe, 30 parking places, which is something that city of Chicago just passed with 30 or more parking spaces. They require all commercial buildings to, with 5 or more units, to have at least 20% of their parking spaces electric vehicle supply equipment ready. So some of these are free, some of them are for a charge per kilowatt hour. Some are solar powered and some are off the grid. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about this.
So the requirement that Chicago just passed for the multifamily, the developer would not be required to install the charging station itself, but just get the infrastructure in place so that at one point, if demand for it was there, they would then be able to install it without tearing everything up. So that's a direction a lot of communities are choosing to go to, especially structured parking, where it's much more difficult to retroactively introduce that infrastructure. Other communities are choosing to take a less prescriptive approach and instead allowing your required parking spaces to also include electric vehicle charging stations. So currently, many communities where there are spaces that would be restricted to certain users, like an electric vehicle charging space, those wouldn't count towards their minimum requirement. So by allowing it to count towards the minimum requirement is a bit of an incentive for developers to install them.
So there you will have detail as you move along this process.
Yes, of course. And I think as a part of the diagnostic report, we'll present various options along that scale of, really requiring them versus incentivizing versus encouraging. So where the village wants to lie on that spectrum is something we'll determine through that diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations framework.
What are your thoughts about the current climate of opinion in Washington with regards to the suburbs and the density issue?
So the single family detached zoning districts, I think.
The elimination essentially
Sure.
of single family.
I can recognize the need for more diversity in housing types in certain communities. I think there is a way to introduce gentle density into a community that isn't going to completely alter or change the character of your established neighborhoods. That would really help get at that diversity in housing without totally eliminating your single family districts. I think the accessory dwelling units is a really great strategy to introduce gentle density without having a duplex or a 2-flat go up next to a single family home.
So this process will take roughly a year, year and a half. Okay, and you will monitor that discussion as you move along this process?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, and Springfield isn't talking about, requiring anything like that currently. So the state of Illinois isn't considering eliminating single-family zoning like some other states or municipalities are doing. So I very much doubt that through this process that legislation will come down, but we will definitely continually gauge the sense of, what the community feel is towards that type of gentle density and introduce what is most appropriate for Homewood.
Okay, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to cover?
Just next step. So again, going into that diagnostic report and preliminary recommendations framework, we discussed a lot what that is going to include. So it'll have a detailed summary of all of the community outreach that has been conducted thus far. There will still be opportunity for outreach after this report comes out. It'll have a review and assessment of the existing code. We'll do that regulations testing that I talked about, looking at your lot area and lot minimums to see if those existing standards are really applicable to your existing development. We'll do best practices research, wrap all of that up into a report and have a staff working session to go through that. And I just want to say thank you and again, remind everyone of all of the different ways to get involved in this process and encourage you to let your neighbors know and stay involved. So thank you all so much and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it'll be up throughout the whole process. So November 2025.
Stop having an impact. Because as you get further along the process,
Sure.
it'll be less time that you're actually gonna go back and like.
We will be updating and, nothing is solid until it's adopted at the very end. So if we get a ton of public feedback at some point in the process that this direction we're going in is not right for Homewood, we can go back and change things, as long as we need to, until the thing gets adopted. We're open to public comment.
I just want to make sure I had that right.
Yeah, of
Thank you.
course.
Sorry.
Anything else, Angela?
Nothing more.
Board
will have
members,
a
anything
meeting.
else? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Have a motion by
Bill O'Brien.
O'Brien and second by Cap. Roll call.
I'm trying to see. Member Cap,
Yes.
Member Planera,
Yes.
Member O'Brien,
Yes.
Member Johnson.
Yes.
Chairman Terzega.
Yes. Thank you all for coming tonight. Again, keep your comments coming into the village to let us know what your thoughts are.
Excellent.
That's why we are here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's actually very good.